Alabama. That word scare you and confuse you? Me too. Easily the worst state I've ever driven through. So for the second episode, I brought on my buddy Peyton Clarkson, wonderful stand-up comedian based out of New York now, but he's originally from Alabama. So we break down what the Alabamians' worst fear is, or one of them, I guess, which is teaching evolution in schools. So we break down, what are they really teaching in school? What's the role of religion and government in teaching evolution in school? And did my daddy really come from a monkey? That was pretty good, right? I thought so. All that and much, much more. It's a wonderful episode. And in addition, I'm dropping another episode exclusively on iTunes. I say exclusive like it's a cool thing, but that mainly means that I just didn't have video set up when I filmed this episode. But anyways, it's with buddy Jared Waters, another very funny stand-up comedian. Check him out. And we talk about more in depth about how religion and science can be compatible and how can religious people in a modern age still accept the idea of science. So listen to both those episodes, check them out, continue to like, share, and support. And thank you. Let's get into it. We're going to start off with a clip from Peyton Clarkson where he actually does his best impression of an Alabama preacher talking about evolution. Wonderful coincidence.
Alabama, woo! Yeah. Great place to leave. No, it's actually really nice there. I grew up really religious down there. Everybody is down there. We got in trouble when we were in 7th grade. We started learning about evolution in school, and that pissed off my pastor because evolution contradicts the Bible. Following Sunday, he called every 7th grader up to the front row, right? So he could yell at us basically what we were being taught in school, right? Let me get out the 7th graders up here to the front row, please. Yeah? Vietnam. Kids, we got to talk about something you've been studying up in your biology class here. Something about evolution. Not on my watch. Take a look at the word evolution. Tell me what you're helping there. I'll tell you what I hear. Evolution. Break it down. Evolution. Uh-oh. Evolution, 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 evolution. You practicing witchcraft, chillins? Jesus Christ was no gorilla. Jesus Christ did not turn water into bananas. Jesus Christ did not kill the lepers by throwing his poo-poo at them. Phil Collins did not create Genesis. And now I do comedy for the rest of my life. All right, well.
Peyton Clarkson, what's up, man?
Hey, what's going on, buddy?
That's it's like the perfect way to start this episode. Like I couldn't have imagined it better. Is that real? Is that
We're
a real
Red Link,
thing?
and we wanted to show you how we created our amazing.
Damn YouTube autoplay. All right, let's get out of that real quick. Is that a real thing? Is that like a real way that people think about evolution in Alabama?
Well, some of them certainly do, but I took some artistic license with a lot of it.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I have a tendency to rail against anything that's so, over the top and so fundamentalist, in any regard. And so basically, like growing up in Alabama, there's a lot of that down there, but I definitely took some liberties with it.
Sure, but so how? I always wondered. So they always talk about, okay, we can't like teach evolution in schools and stuff like that. But where is that sort of controversy happening? Is that happening in your science classes, or is that happening in sort of every other, like the church and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I think down there, down in, Alabama, and I would imagine other, just conservative states where religion, I mean, the Bible Belt, right? Like I had a friend whose mom wouldn't let him go see Ghostbusters, right? Because of the, the satanic undertones of Ghostbusters, right? And so, I mean, that's like a real thing, that people, like they're growing up, their formative years were definitely influenced by like their parents' fascination with, being pure and Christian.
Wait, so Ghostbusters, like, what exactly is the incompatibility there? It's just that ghosts are like demons from hell. Like where's the biblical undertones there?
Well, no, there aren't any.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean,
okay, that's all it is. Then.
You're
Okay.
asking me to add some rational thought to what she
I'm
was
trying.
doing.
That's exactly it.
No,
That's
there is
exactly
none.
it. Okay.
Let's get that out right now. There was none, but it dealt with ghosts, I guess, and so because of that, it doesn't fit with like a afterlife in the Christian thought.
So is this purely coming out of the Bible then? Like why is it such a strong opinion? This idea that this anti-science view.
Well, first of all, I mean, and this is my opinion. The Bible was written a long time ago by a lot of uninformed people.
Okay.
Right, and I think that you usually find. Most religions, even if you go back to Greek mythology, a lot of the religious, ideas were basically a way to explain their natural environment.
Sure.
Right, and so
which is sort of science in a way.
Sure, yeah. I mean, a bolt of
strange way of
lightning,
science,
they have no way of knowing that it's electrons building up, right? They don't know that. So
they see a flash in the sky,
and it's
fire happens, and then
it's Zeus throwing a lightning bolt, right? Well, we know it's really easy to laugh at the Greeks now, that they had these cute ways of describing their natural environment, but even now that we know so much of it, there's still people that believe that a bush talked,
Right.
It's really, really frustrating for me a lot of
So
times.
that's another interesting thing, because by all measures, you should have been that also, right? Like, is that fair?
Well, I think
How did you differ? And
the people in Alabama aren't all boycotting
Right.
Ghostbusters, right? Like this is a real.
can you put like a percentage on it?
I think no, I can't. I can't. It would,
Okay, yeah. I didn't mean like an accurate one, but like just
Yeah.
really based on what you're.
well, I mean, a lot of people go to church down there, and no one I know up here goes to church. Nobody.
Well, that's because this is a godless place.
Yeah, right.
New York City is not. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, so that begs the question is, and this is the fight that's always been happening: science/education versus faith and belief.
Right.
Right? That's kind of the core of all of it, isn't it? And so you would think that a lot of people in New York City, and this is going to sound very pretentious, but are usually more educated if they move here for work. They're usually,
Sure. That's fair.
yeah.
Yeah. So but that's like you said, this sort of compatibility. So I feel like you said, the Bible was written a very long time ago, but also it's not. So also it's levels of interpretation, right? So you can interpret the Bible in a very sort of strict way. Say, okay, the world is only 6,000 years old, and then immediately evolution is no longer compatible, right? But I was talking to my buddy Jared, and actually I think I'm going to release this as a bonus episode, and you'll like him. He's a religious dude, stand-up comic, religious dude, and he said, yeah, but basically, like you said, it's a dated document, and you can still, if you are loose with your interpretation of, okay, what a year is, because maybe, what I mean, if you consider these more metaphors, in which the Bible has a ton of metaphors, then you can say, okay, 6,000 years, okay, they weren't carbon dating stuff then, so okay, maybe what they really meant was a few million billion years, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm always fascinated by that idea of like strictness, and so like, what do you think in Alabama, where it seems like folks would be like very sort of strict once you say 6,000 years, that's the end of the discussion?
Well, the thing that I struggle with the most when it comes to religion and how I approach people that are, that lead that type of life where it's a big part of the decisions that they make and et cetera. I oftentimes struggle with, at the root of it all, I don't believe religion is a bad thing. I think that my mother, for example, she grew up in a strict Presbyterian home.
Yeah.
And the church was the center of life in that town in Alabama throughout the whole week, not just Sunday.
Right. It's a more society thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she kind of swore when she had children, she wasn't going to hold us to that same kind of, whatever you do, we're going to church. Like that's, and she wasn't going to do that. But as she's gotten older, she derives a lot of comfort from the church. And go and revisiting it and kind of this nostalgia thing. The problem that I have with religion is when people don't have the ability to not bend the rules,
to think outside of it.
To think outside of it, and to also to take it for what it is, which could be a lesson, not necessarily a historic document, right? It's the metaphor side of it. And so when you have people that have this strict interpretation, where it's a very literal interpretation, whether it's Islam or Christianity, whenever you have this strict literal interpretation of this document, then that's where problems come, in my opinion.
Yeah. And going on what you were saying earlier is that in this world, it's hard to find purpose, and religion gives you that. So I could absolutely see why people would be religious. Like you said, that's where you sort of get comfort from. But like you said, also it's you got to be able to. I guess you don't have to be able to. People live and eat just fine without thinking about evolution. But
and if you take the Bible, for example, where it gets dangerous with these strict interpretations is that there's so much contradiction within that one document, right? Within the Bible.
Because it's been written by a number of people.
Yeah, and interpreted, and and so there's some very direct contradictions that are throughout that I think, you take like the Westboro Baptist Church, for example, you know, God hates fags, God, created an earthquake in Mexico because, their government said it was okay for two men to get married, whatever it is. It's very convenient which ideas people tend to pluck out to go along with their beliefs. Yeah. Right.
I like so I think you said it in the clip too, but what's it called? Not the Phil Collins one, but I love that line. But I think that's the sort of what people imagine when they think of the Alabama Southerner who doesn't believe in evolution. Is my daddy ain't no monkey. You know what I mean?
Right.
So but also that's, I struggle with that because that's not what it is. You know what I mean? So how do you think it goes from, all right, the traditional definition of evolution to that? Meaning that outright rejection.
Well, I think usually what you hear the thing is, if we came from monkeys, how come they're still monkeys?
Oh yeah, okay, right? That's a better version.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you hear that a lot, right? And I think it's purely just ignorance. They've probably never went deep into Darwinian theory, to kind of figure out what's going on.
No, but do you really need to go that deep into Darwin? You don't need to read The Origin of Species, right?
Right. No. But they're looking for any kind of argument, right? To because it's a challenge of their life. It's a challenge of their belief system.
That's
right?
exactly it.
And it's not easy to go against empirical scientific evidence. It's not easy.
I'm pulling up this right now. Let's see if I can change the shot here, sort of live. I'm pulling up this diagram of the evolution of maybe I could full screen this thing. We're doing this very sort of but then I wanted to use a pen. Let's see. We're doing this very sort of on the fly here. I just figured out how to do this. Excuse the interruption, audience.
This would be a great plug for Windows right now.
Yeah, Windows is killing it. I just haven't fully adapted how to use this yet. Let's see. But either way, we could talk about it without it. So when we talk about evolution, it's not that it's like a linear thing that, okay, there's monkeys and now there's us, right? Mm-hmm. It's this idea that, okay, if you look at this phylogenetic tree, that each of these nodes, which is where there's a separation, that's supposed to represent a common ancestor. So really what's happening is not that okay, one, there's the next one and the next one. It's that there was some sort of split that happened for some reason, and now you have two different coexisting species, and then it just goes sort of down the line. And so, is that so for you? You learned that in grade school, though, right?
Yeah. But so I kind of grew up both in private school and public school. I kind of pinged around for a while.
Okay.
So like the private school that I went to was Episcopalian, right? And we went to chapel every week. We went to big church every month with like a coat and tie and all that stuff.
Okay.
At school.
Yeah.
But I still think, but our biology classes were still rooted in science. They didn't try and skirt that.
So I think that's a common misconception, though, because up until I was like reading about it for this, I always just figured, okay, your science class, half the time you were learning about evolution, the other half you were learning about intelligent design. So I think that's a misconception on our side that no, this really isn't back-asswards swampland. This is like you're learning things.
Yeah.
It's not like it's just a matter of, okay, how much do you weigh into what you're learning in this classes versus your other class?
Well, we definitely had theology classes,
right.
but I don't even recall ever having learned intelligent design.
Okay.
I don't think that they didn't even bother with that aspect of it. Now, I hadn't ever really thought about it, but that's at odds with each other, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, we're learning about Genesis and the creation of the universe, et cetera, and then you go have stop sign pizza at lunch, right? And then come back to your 6 period class, and all of a sudden we're talking about evolution and
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's sort of a sharp transition.
Yeah, I never really thought about it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think. So because I mean, okay, like you said, there's people who are just sort of set in their ways, and because I try and think of everything as a spectrum, right? There's always going to be your small fraction of people that you're just, no matter how much you say to them or not, no matter how much you pitch to them, they're going to think what they're going to think. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I'm okay with that, right? But how do you approach this sort of median ground of people who are open to the idea of Bible not being a historic document, but also haven't been approached to been taught evolution in a way that's compatible with their worldview? You know what I mean? So the way I would sort of think about it is like, because, all right, so one popular thing that I feel like a lot of this sort of anti-science arguments thing is like, these are just theories, right? You hear that a lot. So it's like, that's why, and that's, I think, the sort of sales pitch that, okay, intelligent design and evolution should be taught equally because they're both theories.
Right.
Right. But, so I guess the idea for me with like a scientific theory is that, okay, it's not that we saw these results and therefore this is how the world works. It's that based on these results, we have a pretty good idea of how the world works, and it's all probabilities. All right, we could say with a certain level of confidence that this is how the world works. If there was another way that the world works, it's very, very unlikely, but that it still exists. You know what I mean? And all it takes is the right. And so I think I don't understand why religion can't be a part of that. Meaning, like, okay, even though we have all this data and all these things that say that evolution is probably the explanation for the way the world works, there's this fantastically small chance that this Bible is everything that's right.
That's all they need.
Right.
That's all they need.
I think that's great because, like, because I think, one, you've encountered you've given them you've presented the idea that this is a very, very small chance, right? But also you've also given this idea that, okay, it is a small chance, but how wonderful would it be if that was actually what's happening? You know what I mean?
Well, what's so beautiful about a lot of these scientific theories that are coming up is that, it's like when you look at astronomy and you have, I don't know, Galileo or Copernicus that made these bold statements, and then over time, as the telescopes became bigger and the elliptical orbits of planets, all these mathematical equations, they just kept proving him right in retrospect, right? Going back, looking at it, man, this guy was really on it, and all the way up until now, it's basically been proven, right?
Correct.
So with the theory of evolution, I mean, we keep finding more Lucys, right? Lucy, being every skeleton. There's still a chance that all of this will be proven, with the right archaeological finds and that sort of thing. When it comes to religion, and this is their detriment, but it's also
to their benefit.
There will never be anything, barring Armageddon or another talking bush.
And at that point, we're going to be worried about much bigger.
So they have the inability to be able to prove to people their belief, but they also they have this bulletproof thing that's based purely on faith,
which is sort of like an imperfectly beautiful thing. It's like, I wish I could argue all my stuff like that. Well, you can't disprove it.
Exactly. Right. Well, I think that's what is it? The spaghetti monster. What is that?
The flying spaghetti monster.
And that's kind of what I think that whole movement was like, all right, well, this is what I believe, and you cannot disprove that, can you?
Right. I think you mentioned something fascinating about the archaeological record, because I think that's a lot of what, at least in terms of this chimpanzees, apes, humans evolutionary thing, that's what a lot of this is based on, because like you said, all right, so there's this, I think I had that up earlier. I'm not going to bring it back up because it's way too difficult. But there's this big split between humans and chimpanzees, right? And then you have this early precursors to humans. And so basically at that point, the main difference between that human group and that chimpanzee group is that the humans can walk on two legs, right? That was the big sort of formative moment. And then from there, it sort of steadily grew into something that resembles us. Okay, so now we can use opposable thumbs and we use tools and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of these smaller divergences with common ancestors, which we find in the fossil record. But so I think one of the mysteries as I've been reading up on this and thinking about it is, where are these other sort of, okay, so if there's some sort of separation between an early human to what we are versus another type of human, I guess, for lack of a better word, why aren't these guys walking around? And so what I was reading is that basically the idea is that because we were, I guess, the most adapted to the environment, okay, there's a lot of these huge fluctuations in temperature. We were able to use tools the best. There's a lot of us just in terms of quantity. That's why we're the ones who sort of, I guess, won, for lack of a better word, and then everything else got sort of limited. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, it's a really good question. Why is there not a wider range of Homo sapien? Or is that right? Homo sapien.
Homo sapien,
yeah. Why is there not a broader spectrum of Homo sapiens? Obviously we have race, and there are genetic factors that people that are indigenous to the plains of southern Africa, right? Obviously the melanin in their skin has to do different things than people that grew up in cloud-covered England.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, also that's interesting that you say that, because so it's all about time scales, right? So basically, when you're talking, say you take one of those tribes that are in Brazil that haven't had human contact for who knows 1,000 years, right? But so they say that the last major separation, I'm not going to get the number exactly right, but at least it'll give you a sense of the time scale. But the last major separation between the modern day humans and whatever other human species there were about 50,000, at least 50,000 years, maybe 50 to 100 or 200,000 years. So we're talking completely different. So basically, genetically, even though they've been isolated, they haven't really interproduced, and there may be some interesting genetic things going on. At the end of the day, they're still 99.89% similar to us. And what that means is, one, that there are the same species as us, because I guess the definition of species is pretty loose also. That's how do you define a species? That's something that I was just at Evolution conference a couple months ago, and one of the main things I got out of that is I don't know what the hell a species is. There's all sorts of these.
Well, even with DNA mapping now that we have, kind of has that cleared the term up?
It has, but also, and so that the DNA, the things like RADseq and stuff like that, they definitely help. But one part of it is, okay, not only do you have to be genetically different, but you also have to be physically different. And okay, but it's basically a balance between the genetics, I guess that we would call the genotype versus the phenotype, right? So what's in your DNA versus what's your outward presentation, right? So you can imagine that, okay, say that there's two very similar looking organisms. They look and do sort of the same things, but their DNA is wildly different. And there's a number of different examples like that. Would you call that a difference? Would you call that a different species? And then the vice versa. And I don't think that's quite so clear. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The fact that there aren't, because this is kind of going back to what I was talking about with the, civilizations have popped up all over the world, right? And there's the more and more scientific evidence that it all started in Africa, right? But it's been out there for a long time in different places. So these factors that you were talking about, like climate, that this version of Homo sapien is the one that was best adapted, but they were so spread out that different environmental aspects were in different parts, right? So why is this the version that made
optimized
it
towards
throughout the globe with all the different kinds of climate, et cetera? So with those external forces that did make survival of the fittest for our particular type of Homo sapien, well, I guess there's only one type of Homo sapien, but whatever might have been right before it that didn't make it, what global effect would have been so uniform throughout all these different parts of the world, right?
That sort of makes sense. Yeah.
I would just wonder, the last thing that kept our ancestors alive and the other ones to perish, what global phenomenon would have been so uniform across the entire planet that this is the version everywhere? Right.
I don't know if it's quite like such a universal event, right? Because I think the idea at least is that we were so I get like our current version of Homo sapiens were so spread out and so big in numbers, right? That all these other sort of, I guess, our ancestral cousins, for lack of a better word, they also existed, right? And so, say if there was like some big weather thing that happens, like some big ice age or something like that, right? It would kill off. This is purely theoretical. I'm not an archaeologist, but basically, like the idea that it's purely a numbers thing and sort of the luck of the draw. So, because we have such high numbers, even if it does kill off 90% of us, and it's killed off 99.9% of the other species, like you can still come out of that. You know what I mean? And that's how I think that's at least from what I've read. That's the idea that why we are the only ones, the only bipedals, sort of walking around, and there's not anything hugely different. That sort of makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Of course, knowing human nature and the way that it is, it could be very much that, our ancestors just like slaughtered them all.
No, that's actually, I think you did. I think that was something that came up, was that the idea that, okay, and I mean, this goes back in our recent history too. Oh, you look different than us.
Yeah, exactly.
And we don't trust it.
Right.
Something fascinating, something crazy that I read, and this sort of makes sense. But the idea that, the other idea is that this all isn't separate, right? So this idea that, okay, this ancestral cousin of us, there's still a possibility that we can mate with them and that you could have kids with them and stuff like that. And I think about this a lot, because I feel like this controversy doesn't get properly appreciated in modern day, which is that, and this is going to come off super weird, but basically, all right, there's a lot of different mammals that are currently existing right now, right? And okay, so we know, for example, like a horse and horse and a mule make a donkey or something like that,
or a horse and a donkey make a mule. I forget exactly.
One of those two.
But one of them's sterile, right?
Right, but we know that these sort of different species can two different species can come together and make another, like a
hybrid,
right? But they can the biology is there for them to actually do that, and we really don't know, at least in terms of us and monkeys, right? because those would be horrible experiments to do.
Wait, are you
know what I
saying
mean?
nobody's fucked a monkey?
Somebody's probably banged out a monkey. Yeah, sure, but like not enough times to know, and we probably wouldn't talk. But you know what I mean? This is something that I don't know. Again, this is something I don't know, and I feel like if I Googled that, it'd be super suspicious. But
That might put you on a watch list of
I'm already on the list.
That's
so
so
it's all
funny.
Good.
All right, so
did you ever think about that? 'Cause
I've never thought of that.
I think about that all the time. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, maybe on a bioethical side of it. I mean,
there's absolutely a huge ethical side to it. Let's not get that out of it.
But I mean, there's now scientific. You could harvest an embryo in a petri dish now, right? So like, couldn't they do some sort of a like fertilization process, like maybe try and inseminate a gorilla with human DNA?
Still hugely ethical.
Oh, sure. No, I don't.
But like, meaning in terms of like, we can't even. It's already a struggle to get stem cells to be a thing. So it's like it's completely off the table.
So I guess by me saying that, my only hang up is actually having to have coitus with the gorilla. That's my only ethical issue, is that somebody would have to take one for the team. You're saying
no? I'm sure there'd be somebody totally willing to do that. Like that's a sexy ass monkey right there. Yeah.
Monkey over there.
I think Chappelle talked about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and but back to my original point, which is that okay, it seems, at least based on what we can observe, is that I guess there's some certain human populations that have up to 4% of quote unquote Neanderthal DNA, right? And so there's a number of different explanations you could have for that, but the sort of easiest one is that we banged out Neanderthal. You know what I mean? It's like, and that sort of passed through.
Now, isn't there, I mean, if you looked at the DNA sequence, isn't there something like, don't we share with a chimpanzee like upwards of 98, 99?
Right,
it's pretty high up there,
pretty
right?
high. So, so is there a question in that, or because I could just go on about that?
No. There's no question, but I mean, like, I would be interested to see the same between like a horse and a mule. Like, what's the...
Once you get into mammals, you're talking at least like 90-95%, no matter how different the mammal looks.
Okay.
Like it's once you talk about vertebrates and stuff like that, like it's hugely identical. But there's a couple different things that you have to take into account. So one of the things is that, so at least for humans, a lot of our DNA is what they call junk DNA, quote unquote junk DNA. So what that means is they don't code for proteins, so the sort of functional units of the cell. And so they still have a lot of regulatory sort of functions, but in reality, it's not the majority of the function. So what that means is that, okay, so that means there's a lot more room for variation within that less than 10% of protein coding genes. That sort of makes sense?
Yeah.
So the other aspect is that, okay, just because something is 99% or 90 some odd percent identical, that doesn't necessarily mean these molecules are doing the same thing. So what happens is you'll have a gene that codes for a protein, and so this protein has a certain shape, and that shape allows it to do certain functions, right? But say if one of these changes happens to slightly change the shape, and then you get a slightly different function. And then on its own, it's not that interesting. But then when you combine it with thousands of other genes, that's when it starts to get interesting, and you have this sort of population effect. That sort of makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's, and there's some other aspects involved. So okay, there's not as many, or I don't know the exact numbers, but between different species, there's hugely different amounts of genes are differently regulated. So 99% is sort of a probably too simplistic way to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to get away from the scientific side of
Yeah,
it,
sure.
think about the cultural side of it, if we are talking about, you asked earlier why these people that are so invested in their religious beliefs have a hard time with evolution and even opening their mind to it.
Yeah.
It's absolutely mind-blowing to think about how long these timelines are for even slight modifications.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to get your mind wrapped around it if you're open to it. It's hard to wrap your mind around how many millions and millions of years, and even things like, you know, sedimentary rock layers in the Grand Canyon, like, is just mind blowing.
Right.
And when one of your basic tenets is that you don't think that this has even been here that long.
Right.
You know,
it's
like,
just the times are just incompatible.
It's
It's
just way
not.
too incompatible. And so I think people would be immediately turned off by that alone. It says, you know, million years for eyebrows.
That's a great point, because I think that's another thing we don't fully appreciate, which is that, like, okay, say this big split between chimpanzees and humans, right? And so the idea that that big split is because of bipedalism, that, okay, chimps use their arms and legs to walk, whereas humans use two legs. But this wasn't an instantaneous transition, right? This isn't like all of a sudden this chimp just came to he's like, oh wait, I could do this, and then he just started walking around and just on other chimps, you know what I mean, or whatever, the ancestor, right?
Right.
It was these things happen very gradually over thousands and thousands of generations, and it's something that, it's like you said, it's this sort of scale of time that it's mind-boggling to comprehend. And the other aspect is that that speciation event between the human and chimp sort of families, I guess, that was 7 million years ago, which sounds like a ton of time, but really the estimates of when life started, we're talking about 3-4 billion years ago. So really this is a drop in the bucket.
Sure, absolutely.
So that to sort of even take it the next step further.
Right.
So that boggles my mind too. I'm with you.
You know, I read a lot on kind of these, and I forget exactly who it was, maybe Dawkins or somebody was talking about maybe it was a documentary of some sort. Anyways, just basically if the year, if you took a calendar year and looked at it, and so January 1st at midnight represents the beginning of Earth.
Yeah, I love these sort of metaphors.
Yeah, and then the amount of time, excuse me, that human beings have been on Earth would be like, it's something like the last hour of December 31st. Right, so like if the
I see. Okay, so they scaled it to a year, and then they
to
said
a full calendar year, and I might have the things off, but
you're probably pretty close. Yeah,
it's something crazy. So if the beginning of the Big Bang, if you're going to believe that, if that's January 1st at midnight, the amount of times that human beings have been on Earth represents the last hour of the last day of that year. And the rest of it is just, you know, evolution. It's just like everything, and you know, even the first microbe, you know, wasn't until like December 1, you know, something crazy, you know, like.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, and
again, that's not exact. I'm
sure,
like
of course. Yeah. This is a very non-scientific podcast. It's a lot of work to cite primary references, but I'm trying to. I think. All right, so I think they say that Earth became a thing like 4, 5, 6 billion years ago or something like that.
Like 4.6 billion.
Yeah, and I think the first sign of life was maybe 2 or 3 billion years ago, meaning like the first or the last universal common ancestor, I think they call it, is what it's affectionatally known as. But
and you're talking like a single cell amoeba.
Yeah, not even. So we're talking like. Because, all right, so you have this transition between prokaryotes and, all right, so you have the three main kingdoms. You have prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and archaea, right? And so basically what happened was these sort of first cells are sort of physically limited. And I've actually been reading some, I got something I'll put you on. But basically, to go from these very simple cells, we're not even talking about multicellular organisms, to go from these sort of simple cells, which are small, they have sort of their own chemistry, but to get to the next level, which would be the closest thing to eukaryotes, which are bigger, and then there's all these sort of physical constraints because like once you get bigger, you have to be able to support that cell wall, otherwise it just collapses on itself, right? And so that took a long, long time. And then sort of that first transition from sort of simple unicellular to complex unicellular. That's one of the sharp transitions. The other sharp transition is from once you go to eukaryotes, now once they are able to talk to each other and they're able to form multicellular organisms. And that's the next level of complexity. And that's why, okay, we are made up of billions of cells, but there's individual organisms that can exist that are one cell. Mm-hmm. That sort of makes sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of spitballing here, but that's the sort of idea. Yeah.
No, well, and to have it broken down like that, I mean, that's above my pay grade. I don't.
I'll work on that explanation.
No. You explained it well. I'm just, but so I take a much more macro approach. No pun intended. Like,
okay.
So, the thing that I find fascinating, and you have seen a lot of times now, the people with theological attempt at explaining how we got here. Now we're getting into intelligent design, right? Rather than evolution, rather than
Can you do me a favor and define intelligent design for me?
Yeah. So if
I sort of had my idea of what it was, but I'm not entirely sure if that's perfect.
And this will just be mine. Again, it's a very unscientific scientific podcast. So if creationism takes the Old Testament, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Yeah. And then you go through the book of Genesis and created man, created woman out of man's rib, right? So these are what I think most people, even in the Christian world, unless they're absolute evangelical fundamentalists, still most people agree that did not happen, that this is a parable, that
these are all metaphors. These are
right. But again, going back to explaining your outside. Your physical world through theology, they started looking at skeletons, and isn't it, man has one less rib than woman, and so obviously God took that one rib and created woman.
That's the best explanation I can come up with.
Sure, right. So, all right, so that's creationism.
Okay.
Intelligent design is still in the same vein in that you cannot be an atheist and believe this. You cannot. I think maybe being agnostic you can, but basically going back to these little, the ones you were prokaryotes or whatever it is. Yeah. Something, and the argument is, we don't know if it was a bolt of lightning that hit. Right. Something started this whole thing, and we don't necessarily have to call it a god, but a power that's bigger than us started this, and you can take it all the way. Their biggest argument.
So maybe, all right, if I could rephrase, so something unscientific had to explain this origin.
That's right. Okay. There was something greater than
something. Maybe not mystical is the right word, but something extraordinary, nothing that we could explain with our existing.
Right.
Okay.
And so one of the biggest talking points that they use to defend this is a thing called, and I might butcher this completely, but it's irreversible complexity, right? And so this is the idea that, like the flagellum, for example, right?
That's a good science word you got there, bro.
Yeah,
I like that.
Okay,
let's make sure we define it for the people. So like a flagella is like just basically like a tail on a cell, right?
Yeah. Right. And so irreducible complexity suggests that if you remove this one part, it does not function.
Okay.
Meaning that it can't exactly evolve, because without it, this thing does not exist. So it had to be created as is.
I see. Okay.
Right? It had to be created as is, because if this thing did not have a flagella,
which for the most part probably holds true, right?
Right. Well, so they're saying that some things had to be in place for anything else to start.
Okay.
Right. And so you can't, irreducible complexity, you can't reduce it any further and still have the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so, so that opens up the whole door that, yes, something more intelligent than us created this. Intelligent design. This was not an accident. None of this was by accident. Something did it. And, like, for example, Ben Stein, Ben Stein.
He did the money thing?
When Ben Stein's money. He was also he was a speechwriter for Nixon. This guy's...
Yeah, clearly I'm like, clearly my pop culture generation, I just knew when Ben Stein's money. I didn't know he's a writer for Nixon.
Yeah, he was a speechwriter. Most people would know him as Ferris Bueller, the teacher. Bueller,
Bueller.
Bueller. That's Ben Stein, and there's actually a great documentary that he put together that is in favor of intelligent design. And
interesting. I'll have to check
and you
that
wouldn't. I was surprised to see him as such an advocate, but he definitely kind of tours around different people. I think he goes to a Christian deep faith place. He goes to like a Muslim mosque. He goes to some synagogues, things like that, and kind of gives an overall approach to it. Which, again, we started talking today about like how it goes in school, and that's a big deal.
Yeah,
that's a big deal about what we're teaching and how that goes.
That's everything.
It is.
Yeah.
Right. And can you teach both? But basically, I told you I went to private school for a lot of that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah,
and so you can really teach anything you want at private school, right? You're not beholden to federal dollars.
Oh, yeah, it's all sort of play money, I guess.
It's play money, yeah. And basically, parents pay extra. Mine didn't, but their reasoning was different. But a lot of people pay extra money so that their children will be allowed to learn about theology in school. They will be able to say prayer before school. They will be able to say prayer at meals and incorporate that into their life, where the United States Constitution strictly forbids it. And they got away with it for a long time, but now it's,
I never, not to get off the subject too much, but I never thought about that in that, like, in terms of reasoning to send your kids to private school. I never thought of, and that makes perfect sense, but like I always just thought it was like, oh, you're rich and that's just what you do. But
I'd say that's probably 90% of it.
Right, but like I never thought about it like, okay, I need my kids to be in a supportive environment for the values I hold, and public school just isn't going to do it.
Yeah, they're not allowed to do it.
Right, yeah.
In theory.
Interesting.
Right. But then, we're also talking about a state where Roy Moore...
Oh yeah.
For years, his biggest controversy.
You guys are killing it, man.
Yeah. Right. Well, his first entire controversy before sleeping with minors or having inappropriate. Well, he was the judge that was known for refusing to take the Ten Commandments out of the courthouse.
That sort of fits.
It absolutely does, but that's where he shot to fame, and so that's why so many. I would say liberal thinkers think he has no place, and that's why so many fundamentalists and religious people think that he's a hero.
It's a sort of weird... I feel like that happened with Kim Davis. You remember Kim Davis?
No, I don't.
This is the chick who, she was like, I guess she had the power to grant like marriages.
Oh,
or whatever.
yeah.
She was like restricting
the gay marriage.
And then and I remember there was rumblings like from that sort of right wing side, like she should run for office. It's like, what? I mean...
Right.
I know she's saying what you want to hear, and that's great, but that doesn't qualify her for office. And that sort of sounds like the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and he may have better, I think he's probably studied law, et cetera. So he's a little more qualified than a clerk that rubber stamps,
Yeah, because she was a clerk. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and she just rubber stamps these marriages and, becomes a cultural hero for these people because she refused to do it to gay people. Right. You're right. It hardly qualifies her. Roy Moore, I don't know his background more than what I've read in the tabloids, but there is a clear separation of church and state. That was our founding fathers' biggest, it's a big deal.
So not to diatribe too much, but because we're in this sort of when's the election for
Roy Moore? It's a special election. I think it's happening next week or this week.
Yeah, so this is relevant now. So I think it's good to at least mention it. My theory, because like people are like, why, even if he has these allegations, why is he still considered the front runner? Right? Because my theory is like, okay, a place like Alabama versus a place like Georgia, they're right next to each other, but Georgia has a city. So it's like it's like you're closer to, in terms of the percentages of left versus right, you're closer to the middle, where like it's, even though it's still considered a red state, like if you do some crazy shit, you could still tip that balance.
Yeah.
In Alabama, does that exist?
Well,
besides the college towns,
No, I mean, like Birmingham it's a big city.
relative to the population of Alabama, though.
It's the biggest city in Alabama. I think number
Okay.
2 would be Mobile. Number 3 is Montgomery.
Okay.
But for scale,
Yeah,
Auburn University on game days, Auburn goes from like the 30th.
He went to Auburn, by the way.
Yeah, it goes from like the 30th most populated town, and then on game day it becomes like number 5 in
That's
the state.
awesome.
Right.
I love that.
And I don't know the exact numbers, but so let's not get ahead of ourselves saying it's a bustling metropolis in Birmingham, but
Sure.
it's got some things to it. And Mobile's a nice town too. There are some surprisingly nice
Yeah,
towns.
sure.
But you get outside of them and it goes real redneck real quick.
Oh yeah.
You know? And some rednecks are really wonderful people, but
I'd wager probably most.
as long as you're white.
Yeah, being white helps a lot.
Yeah, you got it. They're great when
yeah.
you're white.
Yeah. Well, you always get like that sort of what's the word? Not subtle racism, but just that like casual racism where it's like they don't mean anything bad by it, but they're just like, you colors are all right. It's like, yeah, I guess we colors are all right. Please don't shoot me. Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that when you told me you wanted to talk about evolution, I went in and did just a little bit of background on the
Let's talk about that. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about the Scopes monkey trial.
Scopes monkey trial.
Yeah.
So, and this is just kind of a quick rundown of it. So basically, this is the argument for or against teaching evolution in public schools.
Okay.
So it started in 1925 in a town called Dayton, Tennessee. Now, when I was, and I of course learned about it in high school, middle school, but going back and kind of researching it, like really got kind of tickled by it because every single person used this inevitable clash. Like they just couldn't wait to do it for their side's personal gain, right? So basically it comes down. So in 1925, in the Tennessee House of Representatives, they passed what's called the Butler Bill, and the Butler Bill makes it a misdemeanor to teach evolution in school. So a misdemeanor, which comes out to $100 fine back then, but in
what that scale to?
$1,400.
Oh, you did your homework. I like this. Yeah.
So 14 scaled for inflation, $1,400.
I don't have either.
That's right, man. Yeah, I was kind of looking at it, and I was like 1,400. So, but it is a misdemeanor, and but this is where it gets interesting. So, in Dayton, so basically the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, once they get wind of this Butler bill,
They're all over it.
so they issue a press release that says, "We will be willing to defend anyone who wants to challenge this." So they just throw that out there, right? So then go to Dayton, Tennessee. There's a businessman, a county clerk, like 2 or 3 other men in the town.
Not quite a bustling metropolis.
No.
Okay.
No. So they start talking and they say, you know what? This would do wonders. Like the press would flock here. People would flock here. It would be great for business. It would be great for our town. It would get our reputation out there. So these guys go to a local substitute teacher.
Yeah. Okay. This is what I was reading.
Named that would be John Scopes.
That's the Scopes fellow. Yeah.
Yeah, so they go to John Scopes and say, would you be willing to plead guilty to teaching evolution in your school? Now, he's a science substitute teacher.
But he's teaching a science class.
I think he did. But the funny thing is, he couldn't even remember if he had ever brought.
Yep.
He couldn't even remember if he had ever taught it. He says, I can't say for sure if I ever did. And they said, well, will you say for sure that you did? He said, yeah.
Well, and probably, I bet you he didn't, because he's a substitute teacher. It's
Right.
Like, you remember, like, the substitute teachers who just tried to come in and just be like, I'm a boss and I'm going to teach you stuff. And you're like, You're a substitute teacher, bro.
Yeah.
You
Right.
ain't got anything to say to me that I want to hear. And
Yeah.
probably the same thing. So he probably didn't. I guess they didn't have VHS then, huh?
No, he couldn't put on. What am I trying to think of? The Civil War documentary.
Yeah.
Ken Burns. He could just throw a little Ken Burns on.
Right.
Nurse's hangover in the dark room.
Right. But, like, yeah, so probably he didn't. But then when they promised him whatever they promised him, he was like, I don't quite remember. You know,
Well, and again, I don't think that he wasn't necessarily doing it for monetary gain. He really did kind of have an ethical stake in it as a scientist, as
I see.
learner of academia.
But he probably just didn't have a whole lot of motivation to fight the system at the time.
Right.
Yeah,
So these businessmen
I
get
can see
together
that. Yeah.
and they approach him, and he says, "Yeah, fine, I'll do it." And so then the ACLU descends upon the town. And it starts going from there. The crazy thing, which you may remember, is that it just completely turned into a carnival scene. Like,
Yeah.
they had concessions.
I've got distinct memories of 1925.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they have like cotton candy.
Oh,
and,
okay,
They have like carnival rides outside the courthouse.
That's
like,
awesome.
So people from all over the
I
country.
wonder if you could still go there and like check it out.
To
And like,
Dayton, Tennessee?
And there's like still like I'm sure there's got to be still like monuments to this
I'm
stuff.
sure.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe not in Tennessee. They might.
But in Dayton though, because like you said, they got like these like
What else?
stands and these carnivals and like sort of weird things going on.
Yeah. Well, so
All right, yeah. Sorry.
So for no.
Go ahead.
So the evolutionists call on William Jennings Bryan, who is a 3-time presidential candidate. He never won.
But that's like some lawyer credibility right there.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And he is pro-evolution and has been for years. And basically what I read said that anytime evolution was brought up, it could not be – I'm sorry, he was pro-creationism. And anytime
I mean, at this point, did it really matter?
well, anytime evolution would be brought up, his name was synonymous with trying to fight it, right?
I see.
And so then the ACLU talked Clarence Darrow
yeah.
out of retirement. Like he was about to retire.
This is like Jordan coming back from
It's like Jordan coming back, right? So this whole
back in the
thing-
4-5. It ain't to play games with you. It's to aim at you.
That's right.
Probably maiming you. All right, sorry.
Yeah.
That was a little hope right there. All right.
That was actually written by Darrow.
Yeah. Jay-Z's a biter. It's kind of bullshit. All right, so he came out of retirement.
He was about to retire, and he did it just to spar with Brian. And the two
They
of them-
live for this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and they had been
people
going
live
at
with
it forever. And so I think it was like 9 days, but in the end, Scopes was found guilty and had to pay the $100 slash $1,400.
Meaning the ACLU had to pay the.
So the ACLU covered the cost of it.
But that was regardless of the decision, that was a landmark that brought attention.
It brought attention to it, right?
Because I guess it's really tough for me to know the scope, but I guess that was probably purely a Southern thing, right? In terms of this resistance to teaching evolution.
Well,
in schools.
oddly enough,
I don't quite know.
No, there were some. So after this landmark, which by the way, both sides walked away saying they were victorious. They're even though Scopes lost, quote unquote. That
sounds like every comedian I ever met. It was a good set.
right. Well, but the reality is he was found guilty because he had pled guilty to teaching it. So there was no way around him. He wasn't going to get an innocent verdict.
Right.
But basically he said he won because,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because he says, in the name of academia, I will not ever teach something that I know or believe to be false. Right. So
yeah.
But the interesting thing is that I think it was like 8 or 9 states, both North and South states, tried to push through anti-evolution legislation after that, both in the North and the South, and only I think it was Mississippi and maybe Louisiana or something like that were the only 2 that were able to uphold it. The rest of them got shot down for trying to do away with evolutionary.
So was that like the main aftermath? Because like basically my understanding was like this was the snowball that just started rolling after this that got people like to be like, okay, this is a real problem.
Yeah.
And like you said, okay, I see.
Yep. So that was it, but it also was kind of the first, billing. Like if you look at 2 heavyweight boxers, this is the first time that theology and science are like really going at it in
At least
America.
the first time in America.
In American culture, right? Obviously, lots of people were killed in the name of science or in the name of religion because of their scientific.
One thing I find fascinating is that, and I'm probably going to do an episode on this, is that like basically in, I guess not ancient time, but like when philosophy was like a big thing, most of like the theologists were also the scientific thinkers. Like Newton.
Yeah.
Newton, obviously we know him for Newton's laws of physics and whatnot, but he also wrote like these incredible treatises on religion and stuff like that. And that was like they were sort of inextricably linked. And there was it's been a while since I've read this stuff, so I'll I'll have to map out exactly for whenever I film that episode, but like when was the point where they separated?
Yeah.
So it's almost sort of an evolutionary tree in a way.
Well, it's when it came at odds with each other, when these new findings were going in the face of what theology was teaching.
Yeah, maybe it's a purely modern thing.
But as far as scholars, they all were based out of the church back in the day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Libraries were all books.
Yeah, that's right.
Christian.
That'd be an awesome next episode. All right. Well, not next episode, but future episode. All right. Do we miss anything? Is there anything you wanted to talk about? Because I feel like we covered a lot.
Yeah.
This is a dense episode.
I don't think we came to any conclusions that we didn't.
So that was it. Yeah. Okay. So let's conclude with something, because all right. So one aspect was, okay, how do you approach evolution in just in general science in somewhere like Alabama or somewhere in just like the South in general?
I think you would be pleasantly surprised at.
I think so. And so that was something I learned, is that like I didn't realize, like, again, I think my misconception, and maybe it's just because I don't pay attention to the news, but I just sort of thought the way this was being pitched to me in the media was that this is happening in science classes, you know what I mean? And then this is like, and they're trying to make it that it's like a 50-50 between intelligent design and evolution, and and like you said, that's really not the case.
Yeah, and obviously I've been out of school a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I graduated high school in '99.
I'm about to say, don't date yourself, but you just did.
Yeah, I don't care, right?
It's all good.
But I can. Ignorance is a kind of a thing, and ignorance is a thing that you really have to want it. You really have to want to be ignorant. You have to want to be ignorant, right? And so, unfortunately, those are the ones.
That's a fascinating line,
right?
That was deep as hell.
Yeah,
you got to think about that, bro.
You really got to, especially in this day and age, you got to really, really want it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the unfortunate reality is that oftentimes they're the ones that make the news, right? And so.
Because it's a news thing, then we think it's more of a thing than it really is.
Right.
I see.
But there's, and this isn't just like to backpedal, but there are really some hyper intelligent people in the state of Alabama.
I don't discount that at all.
I know you weren't suggesting it, but the sad thing is they're not the ones that get any coverage.
Yeah, because that's not fun.
Right.
And I think I said this earlier, but I do think there's a way you can teach things, especially in the realm of science, and still be respectful to what, because at the end of the day, this is what people have grown up with, and this is like their world truths, right? Because you don't learn, no one learned science first. You learn what your parents teach you, and you learn what you go to the church and stuff like that. So it's like, and I think if you teach things confrontationally, it can be a powerful tool, but also it can turn people off immediately. You know what I mean? Like if I'm walking into a science class the first day and I say, all right, religion is wrong, this is how the world really works, then who are you reaching?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Only the people that already believed you.
Correct. And that's not, and there's a way to, I think, do that in a sort of, and I think there's a way to approach it and say, okay, that based on what we see, this is how we think the world works, and there's a possibility of other things being the world work, but the overwhelming evidence is that this is how the world works.
Well, but that's that approach has to be taken for both sides.
Sure.
And,
absolutely.
So oftentimes, both sides are wrong. I saw this thing the other day. It was an interview. Hitchens, right?
That sounds like a name.
Is it Christopher Hitchens or Hutchins? But he's a renowned, or was, he's recently passed away, but he's a renowned atheist. Yeah. And has written a lot of books that kind of denounce religion, prop up evolution, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I saw this interview from him, and it was kind of a town hall meeting, and this one guy said, why do you feel like you have to rail against this every single day? Why can't you just stay at home?
Just be Buddhist about it. Just let it happen.
What's the problem if I want to believe in evolution?
Yeah.
In creationism. What makes
Why does that affect you?
Yeah. And his answer was actually pretty remarkable. He said, he went on to talk about how in the name of religion, so many people, obviously the violence is well documented that has happened over the course over years, both through Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever it is. People have been killing each other in the name of God a long time. But he also says that it has a message where people can't wait for the end of time. Armageddon for...
At this rate, we won't be waiting long.
Well, right, but he's saying, so many of these monotheistic religions just can't wait for the end of time and to be the ones that are chosen. He says that inherently keeps people from reaching out to each other to try and be kind to each other, to try and work together, to try and build a better world.
I see. So like this idea that this is going to be all over soon anyway, so like why would I put time into this?
Right, and I should focus on, saving as many people if I need to, if that'll help my chances of getting in. Well, it's more than just kind of sitting back and letting people believe what they believe when there's an actual destruction on humankind in the name of religion.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's why I feel really passionate about teaching of evolution, about science in general.
I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah.
And then I think you when you said earlier that like wars, because wars have been fought in the name of religion, and what I was going to say is wars probably would be fought in the name of science if we weren't all wusses.
Yeah.
not a whole lot of scientists putting up fists. You know what I mean?
No, they just make the bombs.
Big old wusses. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is a great way to end it. Thanks for coming on. Hope we're gonna have you on again soon. This has been an awesome discussion.
Absolutely.
Don't forget to check us out on Facebook and iTunes. Subscribe on iTunes. I'm going to drop a bonus episode, too, with my buddy Jared Waters. So basically, we delved into... He's, like, super religious, so we delved into the idea of what we were talking about. How can you be religious and still believe in science? And we got really in-depth into it. I feel like there was a lot of good points that we hit on. Cool. So, thanks again, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And, check us out on Facebook and iTunes. Goodbye.